Hi there. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can integrate React Native's Navigation Experimental, at least from version 0.28 onwards, into your React Native application. Now, this is a really exciting new feature that the core team is working on, particularly Eric Vicente, that allows you to have navigation and a navigation experience similar to a router in your application with all of the animations and modals and all the typical stuff you would find in a native iOS or Android application. So what we have right here is a simple recipes application that we've been building together, where you can search for things like onions and cabbage if you really like that combination, or onions and bacon and cheese. Presumably something should show up. There we go, broccoli salad. And you'll notice at the bottom here I've got favorites and more. Now this is a native iOS tab component that allows you to switch between tabs. You'll notice that my state is retained in both cases. And also if we take a look at the debugger, we can see that every time I hit a new tab, it actually triggers another action in my Redux store or my Redux reducer. So what this means is that our navigation and the other components of our application are not disjointed. In fact, traversing the application just becomes another reduction of state. And that's what's really nice about this, is that you can use this router, you can use the Navigation Experimental libraries in concert with Redux, and they all pair together very nicely. So let's get started. I'm going to jump a little bit back in time to a version of the project where I don't have all that fanciness. And I'm just going to start this up. If you saw my side quest, you'll notice that I've switched out my shape, which honestly it provided nicer images, but it also required an API key. And in order to get you up and running quickly, that's one less thing you want to have to deal with. So I can search for onions. I get onions. At the bottom, I don't have any navigation presently. The first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to refactor my application ever so slightly. So if we look at the root of the application, we can see that we have this is the app, the index.ios.js file. We can see that we have provider and then we have the app container. Now, in the app container presently, we just render one component, which is the home component. The reason why I have this extra level of indirection is that I want to eventually have any kind of modals or any sort of global navigation elements or components or scenes coming from this app container. The first refactor I'm going to do is actually to get rid of the home component from here and to return a application tabs component. Now, the application tabs component is going to be slightly different in that it will be responsible for the tabs at the bottom, in the way that the home component is now just nicely rendering itself and going about its business. That will become a responsibility of the application tabs component. So let's take a look at that. Actually, I'm going to have to import that. So application tabs. And you might be saying, but John, this component doesn't exist yet. And you're absolutely right, it doesn't. So let's create it. So under containers, application tabs. And now we're going to do something a little different here. Because I want to use the native iOS component for drawing that bottom tab bit, I'm going to create a folder instead of just having applicationtabs.js. So I'm going to create a folder called app containers application tabs. And I touched on this in a previous video, that actually you can simply define your file name with either .ios or .android or .windows or whatever, and React Native will be smart enough to load that version of the component. So in here, we're going to have a class of application tabs, which will extend from component, which means that we need to import probably the view, probably the tab bar iOS, the tab bar item iOS from React Native. And we are going to need React component from React. And because this is a smart component like home, we will also probably need the React Redux stuff at some point. For now, that should be enough. That should be enough plumbing to get us going. And I'm just going to create a render method. And for now, let's just return a view. And assume that everything will work. So if I refresh this, I should see absolutely nothing. Expected a string. Check the render method. Yeah, I have to. Yeah, no, that should work. Oh, we're going to want to connect application tabs in the same way that we do that here, which means that we are going to create a function called map state to props. I talked a little bit about this plumbing in some previous videos, so I'm just going to jump over it for now. Here we'll take in our state, and then we'll return the elements that we care about. Presently, we don't care about any. Okay, good. So we have an empty component. Everything seems to be in order. We've done the bulk of our typing, which is always fun. And now let's start looking at this application's sort of tab bar iOS component thing. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to think about this. Let me think about this. Okay. We are going to need the tab bar iOS component, and we're going to have to tell it to extend across the entire scene. And then in there, I'm going to have the tab bar iOS item. Actually, I think it's tab bar iOS dot item. And in this case, I will create a render scene function, and I will render the home scene, which means that I need to import that as well. So we are going to import that from home. So I'm going to create two tab bar items or links at the bottom. One is going to be for the home view, and the other is going to be for like an about view. And for now, they're both going to be identical because that'll just keep things nice and easy. They'll both render the same view, but at least we can start to put together all of the bits of the framework that will make this dance. So I'm going to use the system icons here. Just to note that when you're building a proper application, one of the first things you're going to do is probably swap these out for your own icons. There are a number of different ways of handling that in React Native. And the system icons are good if you just want to rapidly prototype something and you want an icon there, but of course you're going to want to change this when you're starting to build your actual application. Okay, the last thing I need is my render scene method, which will take in a component. And this is an example of doing some reflection, I guess. Well, not really. Basically just taking in the component as a prototype or as a function, and then running that through a higher order function. So we could say this is flex is 1, so it'll stretch the entire size. So this is going to be a wrapper view, and this wrapper view will contain any components. So this way we can ensure that the home component or the about component or any other components all sit inside of the tab bar or the application tabs component in the same way. This is kind of important if you don't want your app to look really weird. Create element, and we're going to do this dynamically, so we're going to pass in the component as arguments. Of course, this is the home component, which is actually the class that we defined in the container class that we defined up here. And then we're just going to pass down all the props into that component. Okay, so boilerplate in place. Let's refresh this again, and boom, we've got favorites at the bottom. It doesn't show anything, it's not rendering anything. Not too exciting so far, but at least we're getting favorites, so that's a good sign. So now if I copy this, and I change this to more, boom. Okay, so that was a lot of typing, but we've got favorites and we've got more. In the next video, I'm going to hook this up to Redux, and then from there we'll take a look at NavigationExperimental and how we can get these two tabs to function correctly. Thanks for listening.